Welcome everyone to this joint ESV and VBA webinar series. The webinar is to provide technical guidance to all practitioners and manufacturers on achieving compliance to gas fitting installations. The ESV VBA representative speakers for tonight's webinar are from ESV, David Crew, and myself, Enzo Alfonsetti, and from the VBA, John Lohman. As we continue through the presentation, there is a Q&A tab function allowing everyone to ask questions. At the end of the presentation, the ESV VBA panelists will be answering some common chat box questions, and this will obviously depend on the finish time. VBA and ESV will also collate a set of frequently asked questions and post these on the VBA and ESV websites. So tonight, the webinar agenda will cover some major changes to the new leisure LPG cylinder valves, leisure cylinders between 4.5 kg and 9 kg. The new Type 27 valve, which is the subject of Amendment 4 of AS/NZS 5601 Part 1, and is also replicated in the revision of AS/NZS 5601 Part 2. This first part will take up to 15 minutes and is particularly aimed at general gas fitters and industry. Part 2 of the webinar will follow, which will focus on the update of the new published document AS/NZS 5601 Part 2 2020, LP gas installations in caravans and boats for non-propulsive purposes. So Part 2 is relevant for practitioners working in the caravan or boating industry. Gas fitters not working in this area are welcome to stay on for the presentation, or if you choose so, you can log off. So ESV is Victoria's technical and safety regulator for electricity, gas and pipelines. Its role is to ensure the Victorian gas and electricity industries are safe and meet community expectations. ESV is also responsible for licensing and registering electricians and educating the community about energy safety. It also has responsibility for overseeing the regulation of complex gas installations and Type B appliances, including gas installations in boats and catering vehicles. The Victorian Building Authority regulates building and plumbing practitioners to ensure the achievement of efficient and competitive building and plumbing industries in Victoria. Their functions include registering, licensing and disciplining plumbers in Victoria, providing technical advice and informed solutions to industry, and inspecting, investigating and auditing practitioners and work sites to enforce compliance with the relevant legislation. Its role also includes the regulation of standard gas installations, otherwise known as Type A installations. We'll now discuss the new Type 27 LP cylinder valve, also known as the LCC 27. So on the 1st of October this year, Standards Australia published Amendment 4 to AS/NZS 5601 Part 1. The amendment introduces new requirements relating to quick connect devices aimed at reducing the risk of gas leakage from LPG cylinders of 10 kilograms or less for improved consumer safety. The cylinder quick connect devices are also replicated in AS/NZS 5601 Part 2, 2020. The following slides will therefore apply for both 5601 Part 1 and AS/NZS 5601 Part 2. The new Type 27 valve. The new cylinder valve will be known as the Leisure Cylinder Connection Type 27 valve, or LCC 27. These new valves will not allow gas to flow when the valve is open unless the gas connection is made, and will reduce the risk of potential gas leakage and gas safety incidents. The project objectives are to replace the existing Type 21 POL cylinder valve with a new safer LPG cylinder valve, the LCC 27, to reduce serious incidents that include misuse and leaking connections. The change applies to small portable LPG cylinders only, so that includes 4.5 kilogram and 9 kilogram leisure cylinders. The new connection has multiple safety features that reduces the risk of leaks and serious fires both in use and during transport. The project was formally started in October 2018, however, it involved years of preparation with stakeholders behind the scenes to assess the risk and investigate options. The Type 27 connection is specified and referenced in 8 standards across 5 committees and required extensive consultation between committees. So we have a short animation to show you in relation to the new valve and how at the moment the Type 21 and the Type 27 coexist. We'd like to thank Manchester Tanks for allowing us to use their animation videos. Please note that the animation shows the use of a hose clamp, which is not acceptable under Australian regulations. The first animation shows the Type 27 connection to the new Type 27 valve. The Type 27 connector cylinder quick connect device incorporates a thermal protection which allows for isolation of the gas supply in the event of a fire. And you can see there that gas will only flow when the connection is made. Once the connection is disconnected, the spring-loaded back check valve then shuts off the gas supply. So the following animation shows how the old or current Type 21 POL fitting will coexist with the new Type 27 valve. So the new valve actually has a left-hand internal thread that will take the current Type 21 POL. So what this means is that existing barbecues, patio heaters and pigtails will still be able to be connected to the new valve. You'll note that the new valve also has a coarse external thread, which is a right-hand thread, which obviously the connector that was shown in the previous animation would connect to. Again, the principle is the same, even when you're using the Type 21 POL. When that is disconnected, the spring-loaded back check valve shuts off the gas supply. So Amendment 4 to ASNZS 5601 Part 1 includes a transition period for the valves on the cylinder outlet side. So under the transition period, the current Type 21 POL valve, which you can see there on your left, can continue to be used up until the 30th of September next year. From the 1st of October 2021, the Type 21 valves can no longer be used on new and retested cylinders. This equates to a 12-month transition period. The new Type 27 valves will be permitted for use from the 1st of April next year. Therefore, between the 1st of April and the 1st of October 2021, there is a 6-month overlap period where both types of cylinder valves can be used on new and retested cylinders. The key point to remember is that from the 1st of October next year, you can only use the Type 27 valve on new and retested cylinders. And the really important point to make here, and we've had lots of questions about this, is what happens to my existing cylinder? Do I have to have the valve changed on that? And the answer to that question is no, you don't. The trigger for changing the valve on existing cylinders is the expiry date on the collar of the cylinder. So each LPG cylinder has an expiry date stamped on the collar of the cylinder. So what happens with cylinders at the moment is that if that expiry date has not elapsed, the cylinder goes back to a refilling station where the cylinder will be refilled before it's put back out into service. However, the 9 kg cylinders in particular, or the leisure cylinders in particular, have a 10-year retest cycle. So what that means is that date stamp on the collar of the cylinder, if that date has elapsed, when that cylinder goes back to the local swap and go, rather than the cylinder being refilled, what happens to that cylinder is that it goes to a gas cylinder test station where the old Type 21 POL valve is removed. The cylinder is pressure tested, and the new Type 27 cylinder valve will be fitted to the retested cylinder before it's put back into service. So the reality is, on existing cylinders, theoretically, there's going to be a 10-year period because of the 10-year expiry date on cylinders in terms of the transition. I'd like to think that it'll probably happen sooner than that through market forces, but I guess we'll wait and see. But I guess it is a transition that will take some time to occur. So there is a slightly longer transition period available for the appliance connector. The Type 21 POL appliance connector can continue to be used until the 31st of March 2022. From the 1st of April 2022, it is proposed as part of a future amendment that they can no longer be used. So this represents an 18-month transition period. So the new Type 27 appliance connector, referred in AS NZS 5601 as a quick connect device, can be used from the 1st of October next year. Therefore, there is also a 6-month overlap period between the two types of appliance connections. So the key message is that the Type 1 appliance connectors manufactured after the 1st of April 2022 can no longer be used. But there will be a 6-month period, as I mentioned just a moment ago, from the 1st of October next year until the 1st of April 2022, where appliance manufacturers can manufacture their barbecues and patio heaters with either connection. So the VBA and ESV have put together a summary of the key changes relating to this amendment in the form of a standards alert. This is available for free download on both the VBA and ESV websites. In addition to the recent Amendment 4 to Part 1 of ASNZS 5601, there is currently separate work underway by Standards Australia to revise the whole standard. It is expected that a draft of this standard will be released for public comment by the end of the year. So that concludes the first part of this presentation on the changes to Quick Connect valves. I'll now hand over to Tin Tran from the VBA, who will open up the question and answer part of this webinar.
Thanks, Enzo. Thanks very much for taking us through those changes. So we now have some time for questions and answers. So I'd like to invite you all to ask questions using the Q&A feature of Zoom, which is located on the bottom of your screen there. So we have one question already that's kind of popped up, Enzo. So this question relates to partly the rationale for these changes is how many fires, etc., were found to be caused by the old POL fittings?
Yeah, so one of the questions that we've been asked during the webinar series is why are we making this change? And there's a simple answer to that. It's all about safety. So Energy Safe Victoria some time ago, a few years ago actually, looked at its incident data, and what it noted in particular was that during the summer months in particular, that we were seeing a lot of incidents and injuries occurring around barbecues and barbecue use. And when we drilled down into that data further, what we found was that the vast majority of the injuries were not caused so much by the barbecue itself, but by leaking gas at the cylinder connection. So this is where a consumer might think that they've done up their cylinder, their POL fitting tight, and it's not the case, and there's been gas that's been leaking, which would then ignite from the ignition sources on the barbecue. We've also had, incidents that have occurred because of O-rings in POL fittings that have dropped out, or even worse, the rubber bullnosing has either cracked or completely gone missing. We've had incidents of that nature. So it was quite clear to Energy Safe Victoria that there was a problem here. So we actually confronted the industry body, Gas Energy Australia, on this issue, and suggested that something needed to be done about it. So the Type 27 valve is the outcome of those discussions. The other thing that we took into consideration was that there was unfortunately a fatality about two years ago, I think. Some of you may have seen this on the news, because it certainly was splashed across the media. There was video of a removalist truck driving through an intersection that blew apart, and that was found to be, the coronial inquest into that fatality found that the cause was gas leaking from a 9 kg cylinder that was being transported in the back of that van. So that unfortunately resulted in a fatality to the driver of that vehicle. So that reinforced the need for us to do something about this.
Thanks, Enzo. Next question relates to whether other states and territories are also adopting these SAM transition dates. And I guess part of implicit in that is also whether states and territories are also adopting the SAM requirements as well. Is it a national kind of adoption as well?
Yes, it is. So this is a national approach. So every state and territory in Australia will be adopting the new valve for leisure cylinders. So absolutely, it is a national approach, and it couldn't work, to be honest, it couldn't work any other way, given that, cylinders can be transported around and essentially have no borders when you think about it. So, the gas technical regulators and the Gas Technical Regulators Committee was quite adamant to force this change on a national level. And for the benefit of those that have tuned in tonight, you can Google the Gas Technical Regulators Committee, or the GTRC, which has its own website. If you go to that website and you click on the Publications tab, you will find a technical guidance bulletin that has all the information that's been presented tonight around the transition timeframes for this change.
Next question, and so it's also to do with the transition dates. Question was, why don't we just introduce like a specific date, as at the moment with the different dates for the cylinders and the appliance regulators, it could be confusing.
Yep, so it's a good question. So when we had a look at making this change, and we consulted with other gas technical regulators and the industry body Gas Energy Australia, we took into consideration the fact that this transition process had to be done in a number of stages. So we first of all had to consider that the manufacturers of the new valve needed to be given time to actually manufacture and be able to supply the new valve. And there was no certainty around this project until such time as all the relevant Australian standards were updated to make this happen. So that actually happened on the 1st of October this year. So once all the relevant standards were published, there was certainty in the market that this was going to happen. So essentially, there's a 6-month period between the 1st of October this year and the 1st of April next year where the new valve will not appear. And the purpose of that time frame is to give the manufacturers time to manufacture and supply the valve, and also to give other stakeholders, in particular the refilling stations, the time to set up their equipment so that they can adapt to the new valve. So that was the reason for the 6-month wait on the introduction of the valve. In relation to the introduction of the appliance connection, so there's a further 6-month wait on that. And of course, with that transition period, the reason for that is that we want to allow a bit of time for the new valve to start to filter into the market before we start to see the new connector come in. So the idea is that we have a period of time from the 1st of April next year, when the new valve will start to appear, until essentially the 1st of April 2022, when it becomes mandatory for the new connection to come on or be fitted onto the hose assemblies. So essentially it allows enough time for the new valve to filter into the market before we start to see the new connections come into the market, because obviously the last thing we want to do is introduce the new appliance connection if there aren't enough cylinders out there that have got the new valve.
Okay, the next question, I guess, relates to whether these changes will eventually make its way to larger size LPG bottles. And the example given was, I guess, people living in areas with no mains gas, where those larger bottles like the 45 kg ones are common.
Yep. So the answer is no. This change won't occur on the larger 45 kg cylinders. There are two reasons for that. One is that the incident data doesn't suggest that there's an issue there with the 45 kg cylinders, unlike what we saw with the 9 kg cylinders. And also we take into consideration that the 45 kg cylinders are typically replaced when they're empty by trained individuals. So typically they're people that work for the LPG gas companies that come around and take the empty cylinder from your home. And when that happens, they obviously, replace it with a full cylinder, and they're typically using a spanner to make up the POL connection. So, they're people that have been trained and know what they're doing. So the risk is much, much less in terms of safety. And secondly, with the new valve, obviously with it having a back check valve incorporated within it, there is a slight restriction on the flow compared to the current valve, which has no back check valve. And so the concern there was that if we introduced this new valve into the larger cylinders, that there could be some applications, in particular appliances, that might consume a significant amount of gas, that potentially there was a potential there for gas flow to be limited on those appliances, and we certainly didn't want that to happen. So they were the two main reasons why we're not carrying this change through to the 45 kg cylinders.
Okay, the next one, again on the new 27 type valves. Question was, if it's not done up tightly, whether it will leak, compared, which is compared to the current type 21 valves.
Yep, so all the data that we've seen to date and the experience we've seen in other parts of the world with this type of valve would suggest that if the connection is not done up tightly, that you won't get any gas flow. So that's the main idea behind this valve. I should point out that this particular type of design has been around for many, many years in the USA. So at least the last 25 years, they've been using this type of valve in the USA. And in New Zealand, they've been using this type of valve for the last decade. So there's a fair amount of history there that gives us a lot of confidence that it's going to be able to do the job.
Thanks, Enzo. Next one is, could there have been a valve developed with a bayonet connection?
Yes, that's another possibility that we could have looked at. It's a similar principle to bayonet connection, but I think the benefit of this valve is the fact that it has the internal left-hand thread, which means it doesn't inconvenience existing owners or owners of existing barbecues and patio heaters, or even for that matter, existing gas installations in caravans and boats that'll have pigtails with POL fittings. So I think the benefit of having this valve, apart from the fact that that there's a track record there with its use in the USA and New Zealand, is that the fact that it's backward compatible with the current Type 21 POL.
Okay. Next question relates to, I guess, whether this requirement will apply to the general public, and also more broadly as well. If you could also provide some advice on how consumers will be advised of these changes as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So the Gas Technical Regulators Committee, along with the industry body Gas Energy Australia, are looking at communication to be put out to all stakeholders, including the general public, in relation to this change. So there's a working group that's been set up that is looking at those means of communication, and that will include things such as social media, websites, and other means of communicating the news to the consumers. And I guess this is again that it highlights the reason why we have this 6 month, another reason why we have this 6 month window where nothing actually happens in terms of the change to the valve, and that is to allow time for us to also educate the public on this change. So that'll be happening over the course of the next 6 months.
Thanks, Enzo. Next one is whether you have any information on around the life cycle and maintenance of these valves.
That's a really good question, actually. I don't know too much about the life cycle of these valves. It's something that obviously we can look into and look at the experience in the USA and our cousins over the ditch in New Zealand in particular. They'll be able to provide us some information on that. But in terms of maintenance, look, there's a couple of things that obviously have to be taken into consideration. Obviously the threads, so both the internal left-hand thread and the external right-hand thread, obviously when looking at one of these valves, just have to make sure that the threads are in good condition, just like you would at the moment on an existing Type 21 POL. So you don't want any cross-threading or anything like that occurring. And the other important thing to consider on this new valve is when you look inside the valve, you will see that there's a rubber seat. And so the condition of that rubber seat has to be inspected from time to time. So basically the threads and the rubber seat inside the valve are the components that have to be maintained.
Thanks, Enzo. So next one relates to also whether these new valves are, whether they're vandal-proof, and also whether any of the parts could be removed.
Look, I dare not say that they're vandal-proof. I guess if anyone really wanted to try and vandalize something, they could always find a way. But what I can say is that this valve is certainly a lot safer than the current Type 21 POL, from the point of view that, you know, we've even had incidents where people have wanted to commit self-harm using a 9 kg cylinder. And that's not to say that they can't do that with this type of valve. It's just that it makes it a little bit more difficult for them to do that if they wanted to harm themselves, because they'd have to actually connect something to the cylinder for the gas to flow. So I guess one can never say never, but it certainly would reduce the risk of those sorts of things from happening. And the other thing, I guess, that needs to be taken into consideration is that with this new valve, there's a couple of additional safety features that perhaps, you know, the valves that are used in the USA and New Zealand don't have. An example of that is the bleed nut for when you're decanting. So one of the things that was identified with the current Type 21 POL valve is that they had instances where the bleed nut could actually, if it was unscrewed too much, it could actually drop out. So we now have a captive bleed nut, so you can unscrew it as much as you like, but the screw won't fall out. So, you know, we've taken that, and also I mentioned before about a thermal fuse in the connector in the event of a fire, which will disconnect the gas. So there's a couple of additional safety features that come with this valve.
Thanks, Enzo. So I'm conscious of the time. It's already 6:30, and we still have obviously quite a lot of questions, but I think we need to move on to the next part of the presentation. Otherwise, we won't finish in time. But just to let everyone on the line know that we'll try and answer some of these questions as well through the messaging function as we continue with tonight's presentation. And also as a reminder that we'll be posting a lot of these kind of frequently asked questions on both VBA and ESV's websites as well. So if we don't get a chance to answer some of your questions, hopefully we'll be able to have that posted on our websites at a later stage as well. So that concludes the first part of tonight's presentation. The next part, as Enzo mentioned before, is going to be focused on AS and ZS 561 Part 2. So that presentation is going to be relevant for practitioners working in the caravan and bolting industry. So gas fitters could log off if they want to, but we would also encourage those that are interested to stay for the remainder of the presentation as well. I'll now hand over to John Lohman from the Victorian Building Authority.
Good on you. Thanks, Tin, and thanks, Enzo. So good evening, everyone. The second half of the presentation focuses on gas fitting work in both caravan and boating industry and is specific to the new requirements of Australian New Zealand Standard 5601 Part 2 2020. So this is a completely new revision of the previous 2013 edition of the standard. So the project started in July 2016 and finished in August 2020. So there's a lot of work behind the scenes involved over the 4-year period regarding the outcome of this document. The document was published on the 1st of October this year, and there were 2 rounds of public comment with 126 public comments received for the committee to consider. Transition arrangements for the new Australian New Zealand Standard 5601 Part 2 2020. So as mentioned before, this standard was published on the 1st of October 2020. The timeline on the screen clarifies at what stage the appropriate standard will apply to the both caravan and boating industry. VBA and ESV is providing a 6-month transition period to allow industry to adjust to the new changes before the new edition of 5601 Part 2 2020 requirements are enforced. So that means between now and up to the end of 31st of March 2021, the 2013 version of 5601 Part 2 shall be used. So this is highlighted on the top left-hand green tick on the screen. Then from the 1st of April 2021, the 2020 version of 5601 Part 2 will be the mandatory document. So that notes the 6-month transition timeframe that it doesn't apply to the requirements relating to the cylinder quick connect device, where there is a 12-month transition timeframe applies as previously discussed in the early part of this presentation. So if we look on the screen, we can see at the top left-hand corner, it relates to the 2013 version of the current standard we're using now, and it's up to the 31st of March 2021 when this document will be up to that you can use it. Then if you look in the center of the screen, you can see the green tick that from the 1st of April 2021, that's when the new 2020 version of the 561 standard Part 2 will be used. Now that 1st of April 2021 does not include the cylinder quick connect device. So that comes into effect from the 1st of October 2021, as indicated in the bottom right-hand side of the screen. There have been a number of new definitions included into the revised standard. Some of these you can see on the screen now. So if we look at the screen, we see controlled area. So this will be clarified further within the presentation. Caravan, domestic. So there's 2 definitions of caravan within the document. So caravan itself, which is the intent for living, but also could be used as a workplace. And then we have caravan domestic, which can only be used for living and not as a workplace. Also, we see encapsulation, encapsulated and ignition sources, so they'll be elaborated further on through the webinar. Non-sparking by nature, so these are devices such as plugs, a fixed terminal or encapsulated solenoid. So these are devices that do not have any electrical contacts that move. Quick connect cylinder device, so as Enjo just mentioned, and toughen safety glass. So we'll go through a little more of these detail during this presentation. Prohibition of in situ cylinders on caravans. So in situ cylinders, so these are cylinders where the truck pulls up and now runs out a hose and then fills the cylinder up out on site. So typical, some similar where there's no gas transition pipeline. So maybe something like a farm or something like that. So these types of cylinders will be prohibited for use in caravans. In situ cylinders, they're also prohibited for use in boats unless it is specifically approved by the relevant gas technical regulator. And as we all know, the relevant gas technical regulator for Victoria is Energy Safe Victoria. So gas fitters requiring to install one of these on a boat would need to submit their application to Energy Safe Victoria and ensure that the installation is approved by Energy Safe Victoria prior to you using it. New recommendation for the orientation of cylinders. So a new recommendation has been included in relation to the orientation of cylinders that has been installed on the drawbar of a Caravan. So clause 3.1.4 recommends that the cylinder relief vent be positioned at a 45-degree angle away from the Caravan. So this allows for the discharge of the relief valve into the clean air, as you can see in the diagram on the screen. So the main reason why this could not be mandated is because the cylinder has no sort of locking or mechanism devices to ensure that it's locked in at a 45-degree angle. So it'd be pretty hard to mandate the gas fitter to install these cylinders on the Caravan when the Caravan is sold and the consumer or the property owner takes purchase of that Caravan, that when he goes to exchange these cylinders, that he would be putting them back in these positions. So it's more like making the consumer aware, either the Caravan company or the gas fitter, to ensure if that relief vent is requiring to discharge for any safety reason, that the cylinder should be positioned on that 45-degree angle in a safe, clear area. New clearances on a Caravan drawbar around ignition sources. So this is relating to your controlled area or your controlled zone. So there's been a new figure added to the standard, and it shows the clearances that are now required around the installation of an ignition source on the drawbar of a Caravan. So this figure, it makes it easy to determine where the cylinder can be positioned relevant to the ignition source. So the figure on the screen, it shows some variable heights, and these are determined by the height of the cylinder and the length of the drawbar. So if we look at the cylinder on the screen, we can see some wording associated with that cylinder, and it relates to varies. And the reason why it varies is because the Caravan comes in different sizes. So whether it's a single axle, it might be a double or a triple axle. So when these Caravans have longer sizes, the actual drawbar itself becomes longer. So therefore, there cannot be a prescriptive measurement associated on the screen that you can see now. Also, the cylinder positioning or locating of that cylinder on the drawbar. Also, the drawbar comes into effect too, because of the height of the drawbar or the positioning of the cylinders on the drawbar itself. So that also varies that type of measurement as well. So something you need to consider is the length of the Caravan, the drawbar relating to the positioning of them cylinders. You'll also notice that the measurements are taken from the center of the cylinder. So they're in a cone shape and they go down to the drawbar and then drop down to the ground level. Domestic caravans are a defined term, as I just mentioned. So clause 1.3.8 defines domestic caravans. It's caravans with no more than 2 LP cylinders with a maximum capacity of 10 kilograms each. Clause 1.3.41, it defines an ignition source. So examples of ignition sources are some such as a generator, a battery, or an outdoor power point. And as we all know, as part of the operation of a Caravan, we require, or Vic Roads require safety, road safety equipment. So these are such as your breakaway plugs or your Anderson plugs. So these are permitted on the drawbar of the Caravan. So just to clarify, electrical devices that are non-sparking by nature or encapsulated are not considered ignition sources in a controlled area. New diagram showing drain requirements for cylinder compartments in a compartment. So if the gas fitter or the Caravan company is installing a cylinder in a compartment, you need to ensure that the drain from the compartment terminates a minimum of 1500 millimeter away from an ignition source, unless the ignition source is at least 500 mil above the drain outlet, as indicated on the screen. So if we look at the screen, we can see the cylinder, we see the drain coming from the base of the compartment, and then we see the puff of vapor. If we have let's say it's an ignition source 500 mil above that vapor or that drain pipe, well then that'll be outside the exclusion zone. Once it's inside that 500 mil, well then you need to have that 1500 mil clearance. New requirements for shut-off solenoid valves to be encapsulated in a gas cylinder compartment. So compartments with LP cylinders must now not contain any equipment other than the gas safety shut-off valve. This must be of the encapsulated type. So this requirement, it applies to both boats and caravans. Encapsulation, it can be confirmed by the reference to the relevant manufacturer's installation instructions or the specification sheet. So the device on the screen is only example only, so therefore should not be considered an encapsulated device. Encapsulation requirements defined under clause 5.3 for electrical devices, which are: be fully sealed in a flame retardant polymer, provide a minimum IP55 protection rating, have no exposed terminals, such as be pre-fitted with flying leads, or be terminated via matting connection enclosure and cable gland, and also contain no moving electrical contacts. Clarification of access to internal cylinder compartments in a caravan. So the requirements for internal cylinder compartments have been made clearer under clause 3.3.4.1 and must meet the following requirements. So the cylinder compartment must be designed to contain no more than 2 10 kg cylinders. As I indicated before, this is, even though it's a camper, it's a living space, it's classified under caravan domestic, so therefore it indicates that no more than 2 10 kg cylinders. Must be sealed to prevent the flow of vapor into the caravan or camper when the cylinder compartment door is closed. The door opening edge is no less than 50 mil above the compartment floor, so that's not less than 50 mil above the compartment floor. Be drained in accordance with clause 3.3.1F, which is your compartment drainage area of your drain, 500 millimeter squared, or your 5,000 millimeter upper and lower ventilation requirements. Access to any internal cylinder compartment requires that the caravan access door be open such that the operator is outside the caravan. So this is a highly change within the standard. It actually clarifies that the operator of the caravan must be outside that caravan. He can't be inside to exchange that cylinder. He must be standing outside the caravan to exchange that cylinder within. Just something else I want to highlight too. We had a couple of questions relating to the camper or UV, and the question was relating to exhaust. So would the exhaust on the caravan or the camper be considered an ignition source? So as we all know, petrol and diesels, they do have, or they could backfire. So in then scenarios, they would be classified as an ignition source. So therefore, you need that 1500 mil clearance to the drain or that ventilation within that compartment. Minimum clearances distance between the cooktop and the range hood have now changed to 650 millimeter. So originally this was measured from the highest part of the burner. Now the clearance has been taken from the pan support or the trivet of the gas appliance. So this clearance, it does not apply if the appliance has been certified for a closer installation. So when you're installing an appliance within the caravan, and let's say you want to have it a lesser clearance than 650 millimeter, you need to ensure that that appliance that you have is actually approved by Energy Safe Victoria, or it's been certified, similar to like AGA, have that certification to ensure that that appliance can be certified at a lesser clearance. If you're unsure whether this is approved, well, then you need to contact Energy Safe Victoria. All other clearances, they remain the same. So this change brings Australia in line with most other countries around the world and reflects the new technologies being used in the manufacturing process of some appliances. As we all know, some of you may be working in the housing industry or even with the caravan, and you're measuring from the opening up the range hood manufacturer specifications, and the measurements come from the underside of the range hood to the pan support or the trivet of the gas appliance. And as we all know, our measurements were usually taken from the highest part of the burner. So now this brings it in line with similar to other countries around the world, and it reflects the new technologies being used in the manufacturing process. Existing cookers installations, so these can remain the same, a minimum of your 600 mil. But again, if the manufacturer's installation instructions specify greater clearance, well, that needs to be adhered to. So if you're just changing an existing appliance in an existing caravan to a new gas appliance, well, then you want to install it 600 mil, that's fine, but you need to ensure that the manufacturer's specifications are adhered to, because if they specify greater clearance, well, then you need to have that greater air clearance applied to this installation. So that concludes me for at this time. I'll hand it over to David Crew from Energy Safe Victoria, and he'll discuss the next section of this presentation.
Thanks, John and Enzo. So moving on, there has now been an allowance for hard-drawn copper pipe to be used on houseboats, on inland waterways, on the low-pressure side of the gas installation. So clause 5.1.4.2 now allows the use of hard-drawn copper for the use of vessels used on inland waters. This is applicable, as I said, for the low-pressure side of the installation, so after the first stage regulator. All pipe shall have a pipe manufacturer applied and bonded coating, but all other requirements remain the same. Limitations of hose assembly pigtails to be of Class F. Hose assembly pigtails are now required to be of the new Class F type. This class has been introduced into AS NZS 5601 Part 2. They must meet the requirements set out in AS NZS 1869, and these hoses have a maximum pressure rating of 2.5 MPa or 2500 kPa. They also have a working temperature range of -20 to +100 degrees Celsius, and are required to have an excess flow valve installed in the cylinder connection fitting, as you can see indicated on the screen there. The prohibition of the use of press fit connections. Clause 5.1.4.4 now specifically prohibits the use of press fit connections. The photo on the screen shows the result of what happened to a press fit connection that was installed in a vehicle that was driven from Melbourne to Adelaide, and the fitting separated, causing a gas leak due to vibrations and road conditions encountered on a long road journey over from Melbourne. Now, it's important to point out that this is not a new requirement, that this is a requirement that is made or been made clearer in the new standard. As far back as 1995, I have a copy of AG 601 as it was known then, and press fit fittings were still prohibited at that time. So just to reiterate, this is not a new requirement, but a requirement that has been made clearer in the new standard. There are new requirements for carbon monoxide detectors in boats to conform with referenced international recognised standards. So clause 7.5 now states that effective unrestricted ventilation shall be provided to at least 2 openings fitted at opposite ends or sides of the cabin, or preferably to the deckhead or underside of the deck, where the boat otherwise meets these requirements of the clause, but it is impractical to use the boat without covering the permanent ventilation, so as in large seas and the like. A carbon monoxide detector in conformance with EN 50291-2 or UL 2034 capable of detecting low concentrations of CO and having an audible alarm shall be installed. Just a note on this, we have noticed in the final published version of ASNZS 5601 Part 2 that there is a reference in this clause to EN 50291-1. It should actually be EN 50291-2, which is specific to boats. This will be corrected in the first revision, or sorry, the first amendment of this standard. There's been a new informative appendix, Appendix L, included in the standard, and this appendix helps with purging of small volume gas installations and has been newly introduced, as I said, in ASNZS 5601 Part 2. The appendix contains tables with the approximate volume and pipe for any given length. There are some resources available on both the VBA and ESV website, and we have put together what we call a standards alert relating to the revision of ASNZS 5601 Part 2. This goes through some of the common changes, and this is available for a free download from the VBA and ESV website. So once again, thank you all for attending tonight's webinar. We will be going through some questions now. These webinars will be available at the conclusion of these webinars on both the ESV and VBA website, along with some common questions. And also you'll be asked to fill in a short feedback form at the conclusion of tonight's webinar. If you could possibly take the time to fill that out, it gives us valuable information in regards to how we best present these types of series of seminars, I suppose, to you guys in the future. So if you've got some time, we'd love for you to fill it out and give us some feedback on what you would prefer moving forward. So thanks again tonight for your attendance.